So yeah, without further ado, Alicia.
Hey.
Thank you, Georgina. Sorry for backseat driving you a little bit there.
Well, whether this is your first time visiting Hatch or if you're an old friend, welcome. Get comfy, snuggle in. There might be blankets around because I have lots to say about our new show, Death and Microwaves. For those of you that don't know me, hi, I'm Alicia. And 4 months ago, if I were to give you a brief introduction on who I am and what I do, I would have said I'm an artist, specifically an abstract painter, who occasionally dabbles in writing and performance art. But within that list, I wouldn't have used the word curator. And yet, 4 months on, here I am for a curator's conversation with you. Having graduated last year from my BA in Fine Art at Central St Martin's, I ended up, like many graduates, moving back in with my parents. I'd never lived in Somerset before, and I didn't exactly know what I was going to do. I was having the classic post-uni existential crisis. But luckily, I was introduced to a motley crew of rebels who led me to this strange barn called Hatch, and then instructed me to go forth and make art. So, whilst working at a local cafe, I took up a studio here at Hatch and exhibited with the group in the previous 2 exhibitions, It's About Time and Shadows and Reflections. After 8 months, I was starting to find a rhythm. I was making work that excited me, and I found like-minded friends and artists who I could learn from and be supported by. This gave me the confidence to drop my cafe job and move into being an artist full-time. So when this exhibition was being discussed, I perhaps rather brazenly sat my fellow Hatchers down and subjected them to a lengthy PowerPoint like the one I'm showing you now. And when I said, hey, how about you let me have a crack at curating this thing? To my delight and apprehension, they said yes. Considering this is my first time curating a show, my fellow artists put a lot of trust into me. And I have since realised that curating is rather a lot of work. And at points I did wonder if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But out of the way with most Hatch projects, after lots of WhatsApp messages, emails, spreadsheets, and some debates around the dinner table, it all came together in the end. So, what is a curator? Well, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, a curator is someone who simply organises and arranges a showing of art. But I think it's more than that. In the Barbican's introduction to curation, they write that a curator's job merges the role of artist, educator, and art historian. So rather than simply placing artworks next to each other, the curator helps to give them context and meaning. Whilst preparing for the show, I was reading All Art is Ecological by Tim Morton. Originally, I read this as research for my own art practice, but one paragraph stuck with me and has shaped the way I've thought about curation since. Morton is writing about the way we experience beauty through art. And he goes on to state that, from my point of view, beauty is sort of like having data, but the data doesn't point to anything but itself. That's why you need scientists, right? They figure out patterns in data and hint at things. From my understanding, Morton is suggesting that, like a scientist collecting data, when we bring different artworks together, we can begin to find patterns and make meaning. And if that's true, is not a curator rather like the scientist, trying to figure out what the meaning is behind all these data points? That's not to say that one artwork alone can't have meaning, but it's sometimes hard to decipher what that is. That's often why we give artworks titles and descriptions, to make the work more accessible and approachable. When I came on to curate this show, our theme, death and microwaves, had already been set, but we didn't yet know what the message was we were trying to convey. My job was to take each artist's individual ideas and bring them together into a larger, more cohesive whole. I was given all the characters in a play and told to write the story. And so, that is what I've tried to do. I'd like to tell you now the story of Death and Microwaves, and to look at how each work fits together and see what connections or stories are being told between them. We start with Melanie Thompson's Shearsburg Girls, which shows photographic banners of young women who she worked with in Shearsburg, Germany in 1995. The work came only 6 years on from the fall of the Berlin Wall, a time of massive political revolution where democracy was being placed at the fore. The European Union has now established the right to be forgotten, and in Germany, all personal records are deleted after 10 years. So, Melanie's girls are lost to the passage of time. The banners, which are hung in a line, are perhaps an echo of that pivotal moment in history, a moment of change. And they then lead us forward into a new narrative, to the history being made today. As we walk through the barn, we can hear a soundscape of whirring microwaves composed by Phil Nicholas, accompanying Mark Freestone's evocative spoken word piece titled Lucid Dreaming. We are drawn through time as the earth turns, we wake, the earth turns, we sleep. And at the end, Mark instructs us to listen, breathe, wait. We hear that all familiar ding of the microwave, and we are told, you're ready. We have been cooked. We are prepared to venture forward, to look, to listen, to interact, to reflect, and hopefully to respond. For me, Melanie, Phil, and Mark's work is like the prequel to our story, the first course before the main meal. Once we arrive at Elaoise Benson's work, that we are confronted with both death and microwaves head-on. This might appear to be a rather humorous take on the theme, but Lisa's interpretation of Pandora's box acts as a tableau, a dramatic freeze frame which manages to capture the most pertinent questions of our story. Lisa writes in her statement that the skeleton isn't just Pandora, it also represents humanity still letting those evils out into the world. And our environment, seen in the torn up monoprints, is being ripped apart. When Pandora opened the box, she released all the evils of the world, save for the one that was left when she slammed the box shut. Hope. Is hope still inside this microwave? Has it not yet been cooked? Or has it been cooked too long? Has it burned, like our planet is burning? I believe Lisa is asking some very fundamental questions to do with what it means to be human in the modern age. What does it mean to grieve our past? Can we have hope for a brighter future? There is certainly a sense of hope in amongst the destruction of Georgina's painting, inspired by the light and life of the Porlock Marshes. I shall not attempt to unpack everything that Georgina is trying to convey here. She fortunately has her own talk to do that in. But the work does, as the title suggests, feel like it's floating. It becomes a barrier between us and the rest of the barn. But, like the Berlin Wall, it will fall, cut by cut. Cutting up this painting goes against all our instincts as a viewer. But as we cut away, canvas falls to the floor, the whole space changes. The painting's silhouette creates strange shadows, and through the gaps, we see a glimpse of artworks that were previously hidden. With these scissors, we've either been gifted or burdened with the power to change. We become part of the work itself and part of its new life. What we do with that power is up to us. When artist, writer, and filmmaker Derek Jarman was diagnosed with HIV and facing death, he built himself a sanctuary in the form of Prospect Cottage at Dungeness Power Station. He took the knowledge of his impending death and made something beautiful. This story is celebrated in Grace Green's painting, Earth Burial, which is bursting with life and growth. Grace's work, like Georgina's, is concerned with care and love. In her second painting, Sky Burial, she depicts the Buddhist funeral practice Bhutan. Grace states that Buddhism teaches kindness for all beings, and leaving your body as food for the earth and its creatures is considered to be a final act of kindness. Grace, Georgina, and Lisa all share a deep love of the landscape, a love that is bittersweet, like an outpouring of grief. Opposite Grace, Fiona Campbell uses her eco-conscious artivism to consider the magnitude of our universe. In a work titled Dust of Stars, Fiona takes unconventional materials from previous work, scrap piles, and from the barn itself to create something new. Again, I won't dissect this too much, as Fiona will be talking about her practice next week, but rather than having any particular humanistic or ecological lens, Fiona's work appears to take an ontological approach. Ontology is the philosophical study of being, the study of stuff, of objecthood. Fiona says that she sees these intersecting shadows and objects as a metaphor for life, vitalism, and regeneration. Because, as the astronomer Carl Sagan wrote, life comes from the dust of stars, and we return to dust. When placed in conjunction with the other works in this show, there is a message here that when we hurt the planet, we are hurting the very stuff we are made of. I think these artists could be seen as taking on the role of the Grim Reaper, the ominous sign of death and environmental destruction approaching, but in their innate beauty, they are also celebrating life, a sanctuary from the darkness of our times. We then move on to Amanda's work, The Angel. Again made with repurposed material, her work is inspired by a Spanish aphorism. The saying goes that death is only a part of life. Amanda is creating a materialistic reincarnation. The word angel comes from the Greek angelos, meaning messenger. Amanda says we all have our guardian angel. Open up your heart and she will find you. From my own interpretation, if death is only a part of life, one piece of a larger puzzle, Amanda's angel is a messenger for more to come, not necessarily just in a religious sense, but that maybe there is a future to still have hope for. Moving on to Sarah Meikle's first work, Loss and Enlightenment, which poignantly depicts how one's world collapses when we experience grief. I can't help but compare this work with George Frederick Watts' painting titled Hope, where the embodiment of hope sits atop the world, blindfolded, plucking the last remaining string of her lyre. Even in the desolation of losing a close friend, Sarah witnessed a small whirlwind of leaves spring up at her feet and saw it as a sign that there is far more to life than death. In the centre of the barn, Nina Gron-Lewis has made an equally powerful dedication to her friend, Dr. Linda Rose. Linda studied how smart textiles could be developed to neutralise radiation, and so it feels very apt for Nina to celebrate Linda's work and the influence it has had on her own textile practice. Placed in between Sarah and Amanda, Nina presents this work like an altarpiece. The fresh flowers placed in glass bottles will wilt and die, but the ancient symbolism of love used with the rose-quartz stone will remain steadfast. Her friendship with Linda and Linda's legacy will continue on. Zoe's work also unpacks ideas around legacy, remembrance, and grief. Her first work, The Physical Impossibility of Living in the Mind of Someone Dead, tells the story of a forgotten domestic scene. The TV is broken, magazines litter the floor, and a fish has been misplaced in the microwave. This work can be approached in numerous ways. Perhaps it is a reflection on dementia and the degradation of memory. Perhaps it is a comment on how we can forget or neglect people as they grow older. Her second piece, Three Baking, titled after the Sinead O'Connor song, is a heartbreakingly honest work exploring what it means to grieve after miscarriage. Zoe, Sarah, and Nina have all bravely shared their deeply personal stories of loss and grief, and in doing so, they give us, the viewer, a moment to reflect and mourn also. Art is a beautiful tool for self-expression, and if we let it, it can help us heal this hurting. Alison Jacobs' work explores collective grief through documenting the death or closure of the Wandsworth paper mill in Watchet. Not only was papermaking key to Watchet's economy, but it was part of the culture, history, and legacy of the town and its residents. You'll be hearing more from Alison very shortly, but coming to the midway point through the exhibition, I think it touches on many similar themes to the works we have already discussed. It explores objecthood, legacy, love, and makes us think about what our role is as artists. Coming back to my comparison of the Grim Reaper, artists can become overseers, and in documenting histories or stories, we inevitably end up creating new ones, giving them new life. Besides Alison is Tina Salvage's Ode to a Future Past, which takes the form of a mausoleum encased in a Faraday cage. This is a device used to block electromagnetic radiation from across the electromagnetic spectrum, including microwaves. Tina has placed community-made ceramic mobiles in a display cabinet, as though they are recovered artifacts from an ancient civilization. Tina writes that when mobile phone technology was first introduced, there was mass panic about microwaves affecting the user's brains. This is now largely forgotten. Like at the beginning of the show with Pandora's Box, we are again drawn to question what the impact of our technological age will have in the years to come, especially as it continues to develop so rapidly. Things that once seemed terrifyingly strange are now old news. But is the Faraday cage trying to contain the artifacts, or is it trying to protect them from something far more sinister outside. As we move forward to Sebastian Chance's work, we see ceramic birds set against a dramatic animation of birds flying towards a phone mast. In his statement, Sebastian questions whether the birds are aware of the mast's presence. Are they able to detect the waves it is emitting, and do they sense danger? The impact phone masts or microwaves have on birds is still questionable and continues to be studied. Can we ever really fully understand what a microwave is or what it can do? And in the same way, can we ever really fully understand death? There are many things in life that remain unknown, and many artists like to lean into that grey area, to that which is slippery and unanswerable. Melanie Deegan is interested in the unknown future of technology, exploring how old forms of data collection are becoming extinct. Her burnt, stretched and bubbling CDs hang in a luminous cloud, hovering in the centre of the barn. The title Digital Decay denotes Melanie's concern that the physical records of our existence will be minimal. We rarely write letters, printed materials are disposable, and books are no longer treasured. Like Tina, she wonders how today's society will be viewed by future generations, and if, like CDs, and all our technology becomes defunct or unusable, will our art, culture and music be preserved at all? As we saw with Shearsburg Girls, it is easy to lose information through time. Sarah Meikle's second work, Decenium Tower, is perhaps a more light-hearted comment on technology and time. We see how one family's flat changes through the decades, rendered in illustrated polystyrene. Inventions such as the microwave oven in the 1970s changed the shape of their home. And we see the drawn TV screen gradually become bigger and bigger. In the same way that Alison has documented the death of the paper mill, how will we document and preserve our present cultural history? What will be the most pivotal moments in our lives? Will it be birth, marriages and deaths, or microwave ovens, mobile phones, social media and TV screens? So, as we come to Debbie Sutton's work, we are already feeling the looming presence of time. Time as something unending but forever changing, part of the natural cycle of life and death. Debbie's work is simply called Work in Progress and presents objects in different states of birth, transition and decay. When Debbie presented the idea to me, I was immediately reminded of Olaf Eliasson's sculpture titled Ice Wash, which Tim Morton wrote about in All Art is Ecological. In watching the ice melt, we are made more aware of time's presence. In a similar way to that of Fiona's work, Debbie presents a study of time as object. Tim Morton writes that time is something posited, is part of aesthetic experience. It's in front of things ontologically, not an ocean which they are floating, but a sort of liquid that pours out of a thing. So, when time is so slippery and death forever looming but yet unknowable, how are we to navigate this crazy thing called the present? Kristen Lindop's work, Existing, which moves back into the centre of the barn, attempts to navigate this. A gift, or the present, is suspended at eye level, on a red ribbon which draws our eye up to a silhouetted black crow. The crow is a well-known symbol of death, but when we look inside the box, we see what Kristen interprets as the present moment, like a kaleidoscopic constellation of stars. She writes, by giving us the gift of death, with the promise of a return to the universe as egoless atoms and energies, the crow refocuses our attention on our experience of life now. This refocusing, with a deeper understanding of our finite lives, has implications for our decision-making, both for ourselves and in how we treat others. So, with this in mind, we can move forward to Rod's photographs. On one side, we have death, and on the other, microwaves. Coming to the end of the show, do we still see these themes as separate entities, or do they intersect? Do they relate to one another? Is the care in looking after a loved one on the brink of death the same care we have for tending to our planet? Is it the same care we have for creating our future? We end with Phil Nicholas and Louisa Gosling's sound installation, Ascension. Again, it is a work that can be interpreted in many ways, as a religious or spiritual depiction of death, as a sort of dystopian future, a heavenly utopia with swirling lights and cloud. If you look closely, you will notice a melting clock on one of the tree's branches, which I find reminiscent of Salvador Dali's work, A Persistence of Memory. This was a symbol of time's relativity, of death and life collapsing in on themselves, so that all we are left with is the here and now. This is our exhibition story. One of love and loss, of technological advancements, destruction and reincarnation, rewritings of the past and future imaginations. But for those listening carefully, you will have noticed that there is still a puzzle piece missing. I have missed someone out. Me. Like any storyteller, I have biases. I can be an unreliable narrator. I can withhold information. When talking about how I came to curate this show, I sort of sidestepped the question as to why I wanted to curate the show in the first place. The reality is that after hearing the show's title, I didn't feel I could contribute a physical work. I wasn't sure I would even be in Somerset, and anyway, it would be too hard, too painful to unpack such heavy topics. I still wanted to contribute, but I didn't want my voice to be heard. Which, to be honest, shows you how little I really understood about the role of a curator. Because as the exhibition's narrator, I've become a focal point, a voice through which all these other artists' stories are being told. And inevitably, my story has become intertwined with theirs. In April of 2022, my mum died by suicide. I was in the final term of my degree, and suddenly my entire understanding of the world and what my role was in it collapsed. At first, I tried to keep moving. We had the funeral, I finished my degree, I looked for work in London, but failing to find something that felt right, I conceded to moving to Somerset on what I imagined would be a short time out. I didn't know it, but the move to Somerset would be the best decision I made in my grief process, because rather than busying myself with other things, I was confronted with quiet, space, and time. And I found people that wanted to listen. I found that I actually needed to process the pain. I found that talking about it actually helped. My journey at Hatch feels so tied to my journey in grief. The first exhibition I took part in, I presented a video that I'd started making in March of 2022 that I couldn't complete after the loss. The work was about faith and family, but it wasn't explicitly about grief. In my second exhibition, which took place around Mother's Day, I made a wishing well wrapped in a mural inspired by my childhood and the local wood. Yet, in the artist's walkthrough before the exhibition opened, I had to excuse myself to cry in private, because though I had told people about my loss, I wasn't truly ready to talk about it. And so here I was, curating this show explicitly about death, and I didn't think I could do it. I couldn't stand up here and say I lost her, that it hurt, and it's still hurting, and it won't ever stop. I didn't think I needed to. I didn't think people wanted to hear it. But as we talked about what death and microwaves meant and why we were putting on the show, the same point kept being raised. That death is a taboo topic, something society fails to properly talk about, but desperately needs to. It's funny because it's such a well-known phrase, but art truly does reflect life. I find that as an artist, sometimes my subconscious starts making the work before my logical brain has decided it even wants it. Over the last year, I wrote as a way to process what I'd been feeling. And so one night at about 1 a.m, I found myself writing about daisy chains. Before I knew it, a memory of my mum making daisy chains for me at the summer fete had turned into the idea for a performance. If I'm honest, I had been thinking about a performance exploring funeral procession since exhibition preparations began. I had the data points, but they weren't directed at anything. They weren't grounded. It was only in the process of contextualizing everyone else's work that I was able to accept the context which grounded my own. I rewrote my artist statement at the last minute, deciding that it was important to state that my mum died by suicide, because although I don't want her life to be defined by her death, in my grief I have experienced that we can feel more loneliness then than we've ever felt before. And what a grieving person needs to be told most is that they aren't alone. So now you have the whole story. Well, at least my version of it. The exhibition will mean something different to each artist and to each of you, our wonderful audience. But to me, despite its dark underbelly, this exhibition is really a celebration of what it means to connect and empathise with one another. It is a call for kindness, a call for love. Because, as one of my favourite art theorists, John Berger, wrote, we whisper for that which has been lost, not out of nostalgia, but because it is on the site of loss that hopes are born. Thanks, Ian.